I'm Kate Young.
I'm Tyler Lake, and you're listening to Nice Work.
Hey, Tyler, were you familiar with Alice Wong before this week?
I knew about her, but not much.
I definitely knew about her, but my knowledge was limited. I knew she was a disability rights advocate, but I didn't know the details.
Same. That's why I'm excited that Alex got to interview Ellen Wu about Alice for this week's show.
Ellen Wu is a professor of history here at IU, and she and Alice Wong were very close.
We get to hear about their friendship and about Alice's work.
And, Tyler, you visited the Monroe County History Center.
True, and I've got a report back from a fiber show at the IFEL. I went to an opening there a couple of Fridays ago.
And that show is up through March, so there's still time to go see it. Oh, and Alex did a review of a production from IU's theater department.
He did, and it's all coming up on Nice Work after this.
This is Nice Work. I'm Alex Chambers. Alice Wong, who passed away in November of 2025, was a writer, an editor, an organizer, a fan of nerd culture, a foodie, and a self-described disabled oracle. She founded the Disability Visibility Project with StoryCorps to collect oral histories of disabled people and share them through tweets and podcasts and images and more. She was an advocate for disabled people throughout her life. President Obama appointed her to the National Council on Disability, and in 2024, she was awarded a MacArthur Genius Grant. She was also from Indianapolis, where she grew up as a close friend of Ellen Wu, who happens to be an associate professor of history here at IU Bloomington. She's also the associate director of the College Arts and Humanities Institute, or CAHI. CAHI will be hosting a celebration of life for Alice Wong on Wednesday, March 25th, starting at 1 p.m. I invited Ellen Wu into the studio to talk about Alice and their friendship. They were born 3 weeks apart, and we talked on Ellen Wu's birthday. They used to celebrate their birthdays together. We're here to talk about Alice Wong, who was a dear friend of yours. But if we could start, before we get to that, if you could just talk about who she was in a public sense.
So Alice Wong, who passed away in November 2025, was a tour de force. I mean, there was just nobody like her. So Alice wore many hats, and her own biography says she was a writer, she was an editor, community organizer, and I would say she's perhaps the most well-known, or at least one of the most well-known disability justice advocates, certainly in the United States and worldwide. So really, she's inimitable. No one like her, just a unique person through and through.
And my sense of her isn't just the importance of her activism, but also of her character and personality as a through line for all the different work she did. There was this sense of humor and creativity and all kinds of things, along with the sense of justice.
Yeah, so it's almost like I don't even know where to begin, Alex.
Yeah.
But, Alice Wong contained multitudes, for sure. And, we were born 3 weeks apart in Indianapolis in the Year of the Tiger, which is the name of her memoir.
Right.
And the thing is, I would say she was sort of like on brand her whole life. Like she was so smart, so smart. And so creative and so funny. That's the thing. One of the main things I think about Alice is how her wicked sense of humor, just sly and dark. And I think because I am an advocate of the arts and humanities and the liberal arts, I always think about the fact that she did graduate from Indiana University, IUPUI in Indianapolis. And she was an English major and a sociology double major. And I think those two disciplinary backgrounds really also shaped. It was like a foundation, too, for her worldview, her appreciation for arts and culture, but also her sense of humor, right? So she could have all these sly references to different things. And she loved all the cultures, high, middle brow, low. Like she was there for all of it.
I think it's the very first chapter of her memoir. Seems like it's going to be autobiographical, and it is, but it's actually an autobiography of her relationship with nerd culture.
Absolutely. So the memoir, for those of you who haven't read it, when I picked it up and I could not wait to read it when it came out. It's like a zine, actually, right? It's got all these different chapters. It's like a collage of her life in a way. And she was such a prolific writer. So some of it is stuff that she published throughout her life, and then some of it, was new content for the memoir. But yes, threaded throughout in a way, she fashions herself as kind of certainly only as a nerd, but thinking about how nerd culture, how superheroes, the whole science fiction, how that helped her have this very limitless imagination about her capabilities, her powers, because she was born with muscular dystrophy, so physically she always was cognizant of those limitations, and in fact those limitations became even more stringent over time. But I think what she so appreciated from all the different science fiction, Star Trek and Marvel and Star Wars and everything was just no one has to be constrained by their physical form, but they do have to have a kind of willpower and imagination and creativity to navigate those obstacles, I think, and sort of achieve the heights of their powers.
So tell me more about growing up together. You guys were friends from the day she was born, basically.
Yes, and she and I, even very recently just talked about how special, in a way, the kind of upbringing we had was pretty unique for, we were both born in 1974. And at that time, our parents were new immigrants. All of our parents were born in China, right, which became the People's Republic of China after 1949. And all our parents were a part of the out-migration of people from China after the Communist Revolution. And so, like, my mom and her parents came from Hong Kong. My dad came from Taiwan. And then they all ended up in this very unlikely place called, Indianapolis. I think my parents had to pull out an atlas. They didn't really even know where it was.
How did they end up there?
Employment. My father worked for, not Eli Lilly, a pharmaceutical company, and my mom was a nurse. And then Alice's parents, I remember her father is still around, Uncle Henry, which is what I call him. He was a jeweler. And Auntie Bobby had different jobs, including, I think, maybe real estate at some point. And then she became like a social worker. So many of our parents, so there was a very small but tight-knit Chinese community when we were growing up in the 70s and 80s. And the parents' generation, the immigrants, they were all essentially scientists, engineers, or medical, healthcare workers, or they essentially worked in like the restaurant industry. So it was a kind of bifurcated socioeconomic distribution. But that's how everybody, and, it's always, it's essentially for the jobs, or in the case of, like refugee families from, let's say, Vietnam or something like, so it's just kind of like those two strands of that explain the migration and settlement patterns.
Tell me about your early memories with Alice.
So Alice and I are, our parents were all part of this, again, small community, right. And they all we were all members of a small and the only Chinese community church in Indianapolis, a Christian sort of non-denominational church. And so a lot of my childhood memories of Alice, basically from like 0 to 18, let's say, a lot of it is rooted around that church-going experience because I think for our families, it was never just about, and I think for most churchgoers, right, it's never just about the faith, but it's about the community. But then there's that extra layer of sort of this ethnic community that we weren't finding necessarily Monday through Friday. Like, we all went to public schools, but often we were like the only Chinese kid in class, or the only Asian kid in class. So I think in a lot of ways for us, and she writes about this in her memoir, it was a third space, but it's also this kind of place where you didn't really have to, well, at least for me, it was different for Alice, of course, because she had, muscular dystrophy, but it was certainly a place where people could understand what probably seemed weird or different, very different from the other kids we went to school with were all white or black. And so we spent a good deal of time together on the weekends, but also for fun. A lot of memories I have of Alice growing up are just like sleepovers and, baking cookies, or like we watch a lot of TV and movies. We love going to the mall. We're mall rats. So there was a store in Castleton Square Mall, which still exists, called the Rainbow Shop. And the Rainbow Shop was the one place, it was like a girl's dream. You could get like all kinds of stickers. We're really big into stickers. We still are, Sanrio, like Hello Kitty. I say this very auspiciously, we were also born the same year as Hello Kitty. Okay, so, and that was like basically the one place at the time you could go get, Hello Kitty and all of Hello Kitty Sanrio friends, like all of that. So we had, in a lot of ways, very typical kind of free-range children of the 80s and the suburban-ish Midwest kind of childhood.
Right.
Yeah.
How did your friendship continue to develop over the years after high school? I think she went to Earlham, but couldn't get the accommodations she needed. then went to, I guess it was IUPUI at the time, and then eventually moved out to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Were you both still in Indiana at the time for college and all of that and staying close?
Yeah, so I ended up going to a school called Indiana University Bloomington. But so the thing is, Alice did move home to Indianapolis, so we didn't get to see each other like as much as we probably could have. But I have a good memory of her coming to visit me in Bloomington. I think my junior year, I showed her around and introduced her to my friends. But I will say one of Alice Wong's superpowers is she is just an amazing friend. And I've come to appreciate this since she has died, how many friends she made. And these were not just like superficial friends, but like she really was so intentional about friendships. And I think understood very early on that friendships, like all relationships, take work. And she put in the work. And, we kind of grew up in this transitional time of technology. So we grew up in a world where we've always been prolific letter writers. So we all remained pen pals and, made each other mixtapes. And so our friendship really continued, I think, because we both intentionally made it a priority. And she was such a great pen pal and also a fantastic gift giver. Alice would you never knew when you open your mailbox if you would get a colorful letter covered with stickers and glitter or like a postcard. Like one of the last postcards she sent me was from the Amy Sherald exhibit at SF MoMA, which is actually we got to go together to do when I saw her last year to celebrate our birthdays. The other thing I will say, Alex, to answer your question, I think one new chapter of our friendship was in 2013, I published my first book, which is an academic monograph, but Alice was like, I am going to help you promote it. So there's this thing called Twitter. So she basically sat me down. And this is the thing, Alice was always a great kind of like a Sherpa leader, guide and a strategizer, And she's like, okay, this is what you do. She like set me up with a Twitter account, like password, username, the whole thing. Taught me how to use it because back in the olden days, Twitter, if you never used it before, looked like a foreign country. I was like, had all these symbols and because you could only have, 140 characters. Right. So it was all in like acronyms and abbreviations, and there was a whole culture to it, right? So she was like my guide into this Twitter, and it was so much, Twitter, RIP Twitter, like it was so great, for so many of us who were like academics, journalists, culture people, right? And it was so fun. And I remember at that time I was like, wow, she already has 700 followers, which at that time I thought was a lot. I mean, it was, but like really. The great thing about Alice is that she was really good. I will say she was good at promoting herself, but it was never just like a self-interested thing. It was always amplifying the disability community and their voices and their perspectives. And she just really understood how to do that in a skillful way that was also very humorous and playful and inclusive. And it just really came to appreciate, especially, kind of from an outsider looking in, how powerful these like online spaces are, especially for people who have, we're also just because Alice and I lived physically distant, that we could maintain a friendship in this really, I think, fun and robust and interesting way. And part of one layer of that was this like social media layer,
So you guys your friendship also played out like on Twitter once you kind of, once she brought you up.
Totally. And she would always promote me. And just like there was like certain hashtags. It was just so fun. And like, that's the other thing. I think she and we had a kind of, a shared sense of cosmopolitan aspiration so that, we were always foodie, even before people called themselves foodies, because we came from these Chinese immigrant families and communities where everybody is food obsessed. People talk about food as they're eating the food and thinking about the food. Like it's such a food-centered culture. And so we grew up like that, right? And so
right. She talks about, or the two of you talk about, because in the memoir, one of the chapters is the transcription of a conversation the two of you had for StoryCorps. And you guys talk about how your families would drive up to Chicago.
Yes.
Just for grocery shopping.
Yeah. So Chicago's a great example, right? So for the kind of food-starved, kind of little satellite communities throughout the Midwest, Chicago was like the beacon, right?
Yeah.
And so as a child, my memories of going to Chicago, and usually we're going to pick up or drop off a relative at O'Hare Airport and then stop in Chinatown along the way and get dim sum and fill up on groceries. But I will add that when we were in 11th grade, Alice and her family invited my brother Simon and me to go with them to Chicago. And she had orchestrated this very special field trip where she had purchased tickets to the Claude Monet exhibit at the Art Institute, followed by a trip to Giordano's deep dish pizza, which I had also never had. And that honestly,
equally high culture.
Yes, exactly. See, all the cultures.
And deep dish pizza.
And the thing is, I don't even know where she would have heard it. Maybe she saw it advertised in the Indie Star or something. But for me, it's the first time I remember going to a serious art museum and an art exhibit, right? And we can all kind of laugh in a way. I feel like Claude Monet's haystacks become or the Starry Night, they're like the college dorm poster thing. But for me, I was like, wow, this is so cool. And I'm thinking back, I'm just like, how did she know about all this stuff? This is all before social media and the internet, but she just had her antenna up, and I think it was to this day, one of the most fun and special trips. My brother and I still remember it so fondly. It was such a special outing.
And the fact that she, as an 11th grader, not just knew about it, but it was organized it.
Organized
let's all
it,
do this.
got the tickets, convinced her parents to drive. Convinced her parents to drive us because she had a special van with a lift for her wheelchair, right? So it was a whole. It was many steps of planning to get us to get there.
Right. And that her, the drive to organize things, was already there. As
correct.
Well as this cultural interest, which seems like it's of a piece somehow with the kind of the activism side as well.
I think so. I think as an organizer, it's two things, right? You have to have the imagination, and you have to be able to articulate some sort of destination, and then
whether it's literal or figurative.
Figurative, right? Yeah. And then you also have to, the organizer, the part of that being, literally organized. And so I think Alice was always going to be the boss. See, we're also both older sisters. So, both the bossy type A types. But, I think what I learned from her very early on is that as a disabled person, you cannot just wing it. You always, at least for her, from what I understood, okay, I'm just speaking on my observation, that she struck me as someone who always had to plan 10 steps ahead. Okay, do we want to go see this movie or this play? We would do that. But you have to call ahead and make sure, can you even get into the venue? And so on and so forth. What is the seating? And really appreciating how exhausting actually that must be, just to go about your day, but never making the assumption that you can access these certain spaces in the ways that you would like to. And so that means planning ahead, advocating for yourself, and learning these things at a much earlier age than I think that many of us have to do.
What has that meant for you as someone who, has spent her life as the friend of Alice Wong?
Yeah.
What kinds of understandings of the world has that given you to have been friends with this person who has thought so deeply about disability in the world?
What I really appreciate is that Alice had such a deep understanding of structure, infrastructure, and sort of how power works and how institutions shape realities, everybody's day-to-day reality, and how she also understood that you can change those structures. Yeah, it sure takes a heck of a lot of work and discipline and coordination and working in concert with people and inviting people, to join together towards those shared destinations. And I really appreciated that. And the thing is, I think our lives intersected too in terms of the kinds of, I guess, you might call them intellectual or pursuits as well. We both love writing and appreciate. So what she really, I think, really appreciated was the power of a good story. So one of Alice's, I think, big signature contributions is convincing StoryCorps to partner with her own organization. She founded the Disability Visibility Project, and to amplify stories of disabled people. And it was amazing, right? And And one of the honors of my life was that Alice invited me to interview her for the StoryCorps Disability Visibility Project. So some of that is excerpted in her memoir. But I'm a historian too, and so I think one of the things we both appreciate about that effort is that how important it is to document, to leave those archival footprints and stories and leave behind that very robust kind. Because I'm a social historian. Like, I love social history, right? So the history of ordinary people and how meaningful those stories are, both individually but also in the aggregate. And that, I think we both really really understood how profoundly important that is.
Yeah. Are there ways that you can point to that the aggregation of these stories for her have played out? I don't know if that's a clear question.
Yeah, it is a clear question.
Okay.
Yeah, so as I said, Alice contains many multitudes and wore many hats. So writer, organizer, advocate, but also an editor. And I think she was very proud of being an editor. So Alice, left us so much to work with to understand her, because it's all, in her mind, a book is forever, right? So she edited, I think, at least three volumes of edited collections: Disability Visibility, Disability Intimacy, and I'm forgetting the name of the third one, but really beautifully edited collections of essentially first-person writings, testimonies, stories of all kinds of people. I think she really felt strong that the wider world did not even see or acknowledge disabled people. And then what an oversight that is, because they're just like everybody else. Like, they're just like creative, quirky, and she really wanted to help just elevate those different kinds of perspectives that might otherwise be underappreciated.
I have a question about that I think you might, more than most people have thoughts on, if there are thoughts to be had about this. But I'm curious about your thoughts on how growing up in the small Chinese immigrant, Chinese American community in Indianapolis, how that shaped Alice as a disability rights activist.
I think one thing that I think if she were here, she would agree with, because our parents all found themselves in a strange new place, and then they found each other, they worked really hard to build community, And it's not like nobody was like super wealthy or anything. So everybody had limited means, but they had, they had a generosity of time and energy. And I think those were really important lessons growing up. Like, we could see our moms, they would be the ones organizing the luncheons on Sundays at church, right? The potluck meals, or like sometimes on even like Thanksgivings for a few years, they would organize Thanksgiving dinners, especially for like international students who didn't, were here but maybe didn't have families to celebrate with. And so really understanding how it takes community and really seeing that week to week, that the very intentional effort, and also how food really brings people together and is such a, I know people use the word joy a lot, maybe sometimes I wonder too much, but really
Sure.
just the importance of food, like food for Alice and me, like our love language, right? And so really understanding the power of food. Yeah, to bring people together. So when I was director of Asian American Studies program, and my kind of co-director, also Jennifer Lee, who's a faculty in sociology, we did host Alice Wong and her good friend Sandy Ho, who's also a really leading figure in the disability community. We hosted them for a virtual event called The Joy of Congee. So congee is like rice porridge. It's like Cantonese rice porridge. And I think we just gushed about how much we all love eating, but also how that's like such a foundation for community building.
I just got to throw a small thing in here,
Yeah.
which is in the interview and that's printed in the book. You talk about, was it hot Coke or?
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes.
Yeah, can you just talk about that briefly?
Of
Describe that?
course. Okay.
Definitely not something I've
I'll
tried.
probably talk about this too long, so you cut me
That's
off.
okay.
So, our parents, they came from Hong Kong, right?
Yeah.
And Hong Kong has post-World War II, had a kind of a rise of like a kind of almost like a diner culture, we might call it. Cha Chan Teng is like tea houses, I guess. But they're all, and now it's like kind of trendy. So you can actually visit some of these places, like let's say in New York or San Francisco. But what's great about these tea house diners in Hong Kong style is that they're like complete like East-West mashups. So you can go get pork chops and like, macaroni soup with Spam or like oxtail soup or like toast with condensed milk. Certainly like one of my favorites, tea coffee hybrid. But one of the treats we grew up, and I remember her aunt and uncle came from Hong Kong. We had a sleepover at her house. We were probably about 8 years old, and they fixed us a popular beverage in Hong Kong, which is Coca-Cola, but hot with ginger or lemon. Now, I know, and we talked about this in StoryCorps. Americans probably think that sounds disgusting, but it's actually pretty good. Yeah.
I
say
feel like I
should.
have to try it.
Don't knock it till you try it,
Yeah?
Alex.
Okay. Maybe
Yeah.
I'll come back and we'll have a little follow-up on
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Taste testing. This is great. There's going to be a celebration of life for Alice, and I want to talk about that in just a minute. But before we get to that, I wanted just to ask if there's anything else that you feel like we've missed that feels important to make sure we talk about.
No, I think we've talked about a lot,
have.
but I do want to encourage everybody to just, if you aren't already familiar with Alice Wong's
Yeah.
very prolific body of writing, because Alice just has such a unique way of looking at the world, and I do think that when we engage with her ideas, it also opens up our way of looking at the world. Yeah,
And it's fun and funny, too.
and it's super funny. Yeah, yeah.
So there's a celebration of life for her that's going to be in San Francisco, but then it'll be also live streamed.
Yes, that's right. So we are going to have a really special celebration of life for Alice Wong on Wednesday, March 25th. And it's all afternoon. It will begin at 1 and probably last till 5. So it's sort of like stay for a while or stay for the whole time, drop in. We have campus and community partners. Arts and Humanities Council, for instance, is helping us set up what is going to be sort of this interactive like ancestral altar for Alice. So and this comes from her official celebration of life planning team, which I am part of. One of the things we're suggesting to folks who want to commemorate Alice on that day and afterwards, of course, is an altar. So it's going to be this interactive pop-up like altar where people can leave, creative offerings. We'll have like things you can make things, craft things, you can write things. Well, definitely. I mean, Alice was so much about, I will say this, so hospitality and abundance were two values that Alice really cherished. And so we really want to capture that spirit at this event. So we will, of course, have, I hope, really delicious refreshments. We will have, from 1 to 2, we'll have a lineup of some more local speakers just offering some brief reflections about the meaning of Alice's life and work for their particular communities, organizations, etc. And then we will do the live streaming from San Francisco, which will probably last between 2 to 4 p.m. our time here. There will also be, at the same time, I believe Eskenazi has, this is just a lucky timing, a disability-themed art installation at the Cook Center in Maxwell Hall. So that is also going to be there. And let me see if I left anything off. And we are going to have ASL interpretation, and hopefully we're working very hard to set up live captioning as well, because we do want this to be a very joyful and inclusive multimodal celebration.
Well, Ellen Wu, thank you so much for coming in and
Thank you,
sharing.
Alex Chambers. I'm so honored to be here today.
It's so great to be able to talk.
It was lots of fun.
and talk
Thank
about Alice.
you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Alex Chambers. This is Nice Work.
Just west of the Bloomington Public Library is a stately old stone building. It's no Wayne Manor, but it's stately for sure. It's a former Carnegie Library, one of about 1,600 built in the United States. They were all built about 100 years ago and paid for with great gobs of steel money. The Monroe County History Center first moved their genealogy library into the building back in the early 80s, but by the late 90s, they'd expanded the space to include galleries, a museum store, and spaces for events and outreach. These days, it kind of feels like a one-stop shop for all things Monroe County, and that seems like a responsibility they're not taking lightly.
Our mission is quite broad, and it's to collect, preserve, tell the history of the people, culture, environment of Monroe County, Indiana.
That's Hillary Fleck, the curator at the History Center.
We are trying to tell the history of all of the people of Monroe County and make sure that everybody feels like they have a voice and they can see themselves in Monroe County's history. You know, the lesser known stories or people who have been historically marginalized, we try to make sure that we have space for all of them in the exhibits that we share, in the programs that we put on.
She walked me through the gallery, starting with the biggest room. It's a dense but organized space with different sections highlighting the history of Monroe County.
This is our Cook Gallery, which is kind of more of our permanent gallery. And so we like to kind of break it up into larger topics that the individual exhibits within them kind of highlight something in that topic. So we have like limestone history, obviously very important to Monroe County. We have a one-room schoolhouse, so we talk about education. We have a military exhibit where we talk about either a person or a troop or, you know, broader service people, and a log cabin. So we talk about early settlers and the very earliest history of Monroe County. We talk about business and industry in one corner, and then we have sports history because it's Indiana. We love sports.
Let's head that way, and we'll talk a little bit about the current exhibits. And let's start with the one that's going to end first.
That one is called Start at the Source, and it's about the Showers Brothers Furniture Factory, and it's based off of a choose-your-own-adventure book. It highlights all of the primary sources that we have in the museum's collection, and what do those sources tell us. The idea of the exhibit is that you would start at the beginning. You start with the primary sources, and what do those primary sources tell historians, and how do we know the things that we know, and how do we make exhibits that say, you know, the Showers Brothers factory used to be here, but now it's here. Well, how do we know that? We know that by looking at maps. We know that by looking at directories, and those are primary sources. And we're asking the visitor to choose their own path, choose what they want to learn about, choose what primary sources they want to look at, and then at the very end, they can make their own exhibit label, and they can understand how difficult it can be sometimes to learn all of this information and now distill it down into 5 sentences. In our other exhibits, the primary sources that we have dug through. So it's like we've done the hard work and we present, you know, this is our research. But with this exhibit, it's a little bit different, and we ask you to do the research with us. And so we're going on a journey together, basically.
Really briefly, what do we have going on here?
So the Hill Gallery has our current America 250 exhibit, and so this is called Join or Die, Revolutionary War Veterans Buried in Monroe County. And then how did they get to Monroe County? Because Monroe County didn't exist in 1776, which finding historical records for the late 1700s, early 1800s is very difficult. It's 30 individual people. We started out with 22, and then through research, we found 8 more. So that's really awesome.
These spaces change over quite a bit. Give me an idea of some of the things you've done in the past and maybe even some of the things you're going to do in the future.
The exhibits change pretty frequently in these temporary spaces. They're usually only up for probably 6 months max. The Revolutionary War exhibit is a little bit different. That's going to be up all year, so that won't come down till December 2026. Exhibits in the past have included things like the Human Rights Ordinance of 1975. It was one of the first to give equal rights for sexual orientation. And we've also charted the history of newspapers in Monroe County. So starting with like what is the very first newspaper, which I think 1819 was the very first newspaper of Monroe County. So like just after we were founded. Upcoming, we do have another America 250 related exhibit coming up this fall. It'll be up for July 4th. It's about the First Amendment and how the First Amendment has shaped Monroe County and the people living in Monroe County. And then in 2027, we have an exhibit that I'm pretty excited about. about is basically the gay experience in Bloomington. Talk about gay bars or clubs and organizations centered around gay rights and healthcare and all kinds of things. So we're really excited about that.
Thoughts on the big garage sale?
Right, the garage sale. It's always the second weekend of June. There's always something amazing there. You never know what is going to be at the garage sale.
Well, that's all I had. I think I'm going to go down and talk to Megan about the library. Hillary, thanks for talking to me.
All right, thank you very much, Tyler.
The gallery space occupies the top floor of the History Center. I went down a wide staircase past the bookstore and gift shop and back down a narrow hallway to the Research and Genealogy Library. A couple of volunteers barely looked up as I came in before going back to the hard work of organizing and cataloging this dense collection. Around the corner, Megan McDonald, the research librarian here at the History Center, was searching through a big, thick file folder, which I'm guessing is something she probably does a lot in the library, along with a lot of other things.
We have family histories for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of families that go back to 1818. We also house the original land deeds, marriage records, court records, probate records. We have a bunch of old maps. We have all the yearbooks. We have vertical files on every subject imaginable. We have a lot of limestone, railroad history, kind of just history of anything in this town. We have it here.
What are vertical files?
That's what we call our kind of subject files, covering everything from building history to creeks and rivers, communities that no longer exist, communities that still do exist. I'll get random research requests and questions that I'm like, there's no way we have this answer. And then I look in our vertical files and we have a folder on that very niche question that we had.
As an example, I did a little documentary years ago, and you helped me out, and one of the things you helped me find was records of people in Monroe County ratting out other people in Monroe County during Prohibition for buying or consuming booze. I think people think about these records as kind of dry. You've spent a lot of time with them. What have you found that's even more interesting than my Prohibition records?
I recently wrote an article for our newsletter on a well-known criminal. His name was John Lusk. He had several other names, so that's what he went by. And I was just looking through the court records on a different court record, and I kept on seeing his name pop up. And so I kind of was like, let me dig into this. And he would steal things from businesses on the square, like clothing, and he would be seen wearing them. And so business owners would be like, that's my hat. He has my hat. But they never caught him. They finally caught him. The police finally caught him with a literal chest of stolen goods. They took him to jail, where the Waldron Arts Center is now. He escaped from jail. They found him in Missouri. The Monroe County Marshal went out there to bring him back. He jumped off the train on the way back. They found him again a few months later. Eventually he was tried and sent up to the state penitentiary, and that's kind of where I lost trail of him. I just kept on finding newspaper articles and court records and linking it all together. And I'm doing another project now for someone on the Mershon family, which is a very well-known criminal family here, in the 1800s. And one of the court records, they were harboring John Lusk, known fugitive, in their homes.
If the History Center didn't exist, where would all this stuff go and how would it all be preserved?
We have a lot of shared resources with the public library. They have stuff that we don't have, and we also have stuff that they don't have. Also, the county and the city, they have archives there also. But then also, we are a library, so we can actually provide access to these resources while, the clerk's office and recorder's office are actively filing new claims and new deeds and everything. They don't necessarily have the resources at the time to be able to go back 200 years to find a land deed that someone's looking for. So it just made sense that this was the natural place for that. But I think if we didn't exist, those buildings would still have all these records, and it would be a very tight squeeze.
They have new exhibits every few months at the Monroe County History Center, and new events happening all the time. And you can find out what's going on at monroehistory.org. Oh, and just one last reminder, the Monroe County History Center garage sale is, as usual, held the second week of June and the first weekend of November. For Nice Work, this is Tyler Lake. This is Nice Work, and I'm Tyler Lake. And the way I see it, you can't really trust a last Friday. Is it the 3rd, 4th, or 5th Friday of the month? It's just too much to keep track of. But what you can trust is a first Friday. In Bloomington, that means gallery walk. And this month, that's March, it seems Bloomington is really into textiles. I went knocking around different galleries downtown on Friday and saw fiber pieces at the Backspace Gallery, the John Waldron Art Center, and then over to Eiffel, where I talked with the curator of the current show.
Hello. My name is David Sloma. I'm a fiber and textile artist here at the Fell. I have my studio, and I also own the Fell Art Market. We are about 9 fiber artists that I invited. It's called Layered Conversations, Dialogues Between Cloth and Hand. So it incorporates paper, fibers, some metal, all different types of things in our pursuit of a language in fiber. So, of course, there's myself.
Coincidental.
Very. And I'm a slow stitch fiber artist. So all of my pieces are heavily stitched, all by hand. It's taken about 11 and a half months to complete 8 pieces. Then there's Katha Sowens, who is an encaustic artist, but she also does weaving, or is new to weaving, and she's experimented and has come up with daily weavings that are now on exhibit.
These small pieces, no more than a few inches square, have a cheeky quality, playing with space and weaving pieces together in unexpected ways. They almost feel like a bunch of really good one-liner jokes.
We have Angela Caldwell, who is a professor of metalsmith and jewelry, but also in fiber. She created a paper quilt made out of lists from people.
Made like a traditional quilt, Caldwell literally stitches together shopping lists, reminders, post-it notes, and stuff like that. And in the center, on a sheet of otherwise blank-lined paper, she stitched in the phrase, "The work women do."
And then finally, we have Natasha Hines, who is also a textile artist. She has her studio here as well. And hers is a little more politically motivated, and one just has to see to get it, actually.
David's right. That one is best seen in person, but basically it's a cross-stitch reproduction of a sign that hung in Dunn Meadow for a bit. The sign says, "Turf is rooting, do not enter." There's an easy theme here, and that's fiber work. But I imagine as you put this together, you were finding deeper themes and kind of pursuing bigger ideas. Can you talk about those?
My whole thing with my own artwork is creating the language. So over many years that I've been doing this, I've developed a certain style that I constantly play with, but certain themes keep coming through. And so when I named the show, it really was about language. The fiber arts are really starting to take off now. People are really paying attention to a lot of that. And it goes way back. Quilters and all the domestic crafts, as they used to call them, they were so part of life, and now people are actually celebrating that. It is a really lovely community of people, and I'm just delighted to be part of it. So yeah, come on out and see the show. It will be up until March 27th.
There are a lot more artists and some great non-fiber works in the center room of the gallery. So walk, don't run, I don't want anybody getting hurt out there, and head down to the Eiffel to check them out. I'm Tyler Lake. Stick around for my co-host Alex Chambers' review of an IU Theater production of A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Even if you're not a Shakespeare fan, and I recognize realistically most people aren't, the comedy in Midsummer Night's Dream is hard to knock. IU Theater's latest take on the play was directed by Samwell Rose, an MFA directing student, and when I heard that they had focused on queer liberation and had a circus theme, I decided I had to go. The play ran March 5th through 13th at the Wells Metz Theater. That's the campus's main black box. As the audience got comfortable, performers walked around with juggling balls and other circusy props. In the middle of the set, there was a tall pole just asking to be danced around. And once the play got going, boy, was it. Platforms around the pole pulled apart as the play unfolded to reveal a boldly painted pattern on the floor. The set was simple but creative and colorful, and it reinforced the circus atmosphere. Not all the characters were part of the circus. The play's young Athenian lovers, Hermia, Helena, Lysander, and Demetrius, they were dressed neatly all in gray. The costuming reinforced the approach to the lovers' woes. They unfolded without much irony, even as the characters fell into histrionic arguments. Director Rose made the struggles over power and love more literal by putting Demetrius and Helena into occasional kink and BDSM roles. At least one point, Demetrius tried to physically submit to Helena. It was an exaggerated and memorable moment of queerness early on. Shakespeare wrote the young lovers with big, youthful feelings of jealousy and hurt and surprise and rage. This production magnified and even at times exaggerated those emotions through outsized gestures and loud, rapid speech. But this was just one group of characters on that Midsummer night. You can always count on the rude mechanicals for comedy, as they rehearse what promises to be a very mediocre production of Pyramus and Thisbe. Bottom, he's the most famous and flamboyantly mediocre of the mechanicals, is a bore who somehow never fails to charm. He's got a million ideas. Each one interrupts the last. His director, Peter Quince, and the other mechanicals grit their teeth and put up with him, especially because in the end, it's clear how much he cares about each of them. Director Samwell Rose played up that fondness in this particular production. Senior Harley Babbitt's Bottom was well played, as was the long-suffering Peter Quince, played by freshman Charlie Ignatov. According to the program notes, the mechanicals' colorful vests and tights were influenced by 1930s Berlin, vaudeville circus, and queer culture. Another post-Shakespeare add-on was music of queer icons like Chappell Roan and David Bowie. The mechanicals sang an a cappella rendition of Pink Pony Club whenever they entered the stage. For all the ways the mechanicals bug each other, their mutual affection seemed to be another expression of queer joy, the importance of choosing your own people. But wait, you ask. Sure, chosen kin, Chappell Roan and David Bowie, a touch of kink. Seems like Midsummer could be even queerer than that. Don't worry. When the fairy king and queen appear, they're not gendered as you might expect. King Oberon is played as a pants roll by freshman Kayla Trevino, and Titania, played by non-binary freshman A.J. Thomas, comes across with the elegance and flair of a drag queen. Oberon and Titania are not the meatiest parts, but both freshmen knew how to occupy the stage. Thomas' Titania moved like a ballet dancer, with a skill that was as likely informed by classical dance as it may have been by drag performance. And Trevino, as Oberon, rose to a challenge even the most seasoned Shakespearean actors sometimes fail to meet. She conveyed the meaning of every word she spoke. And then, of course, there's the famous sprite Puck, also known as Robin Goodfellow. Puck was played by freshman Andrew Beasley, who, like Trevino, seemed very comfortable on stage. He knew how to draw our attention with his eyes and stance and gestures. At the end, he graced us with guitar skill and a confident, excellent voice. Jay Butcher, as Helena, joined for some lovely harmonies. The physical comedy of so many characters came through in this production, and even on opening night, the actors rarely stumbled over their words. That was a testament to commitment from the actors and a strong rehearsal process. The acting students, rude mechanicals and otherwise, put on their show with enthusiasm. Samwell Rose's production of A Midsummer Night's Dream celebrated the communal nature of queer performance, where performing with and for your peers is at least as much of a joy as performing for an audience. I'm Alex Chambers, and this is Nice Work.
You've been listening to Nice Work, a production of WFIU, WTIU, and Indiana Public Media. Find us at ipm.org.
This episode was produced and edited by Kate Young. We get production help from Danny William, Holly Wilkerson, Carl Templeton, Leo Pies, Jillian Blackburn, and Jonah Ballard.
Our theme music was composed and performed by Alan Davis. Additional music from Universal Production Music. The executive producer is Eric Bolstridge. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Nice work, Kate.
Nice work, Tyler.